and welcome back to Cinematic Sarcastic, podcast that talks all things movies and television. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. On today's episode, we're going to talk A Gentleman in Moscow. This is a new Showtime series. I believe there are 2 episodes out right now, starring Ewan McGregor. It is based on a book of the same name. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with A Gentleman in Moscow, this is a historical fiction book that is based around a character named Alexander, who is a wealthy Russian, and sort of the things that happened to him following the Russian Revolution of 1917. So essentially, even though this is a fictional character, a lot of what happens to him is fairly true to life. The wealthy and the royal family, of course, their riches were taken from them, their possessions were taken from them, and this is where in the timeline of Russia, we see the Bolsheviks take over, which would eventually become the Communist Party. Now, as far as I can tell, the book is very well received. People seem to really, really love the book, but I think that reviews on the television show are kind of a take it or leave it sort of situation. And for me, A Gentleman in Moscow is a leave it situation. I think that because of what is going on in the show. And so essentially the character of Alexander, after his home has been burned and he sends his mother to kind of escape the country, he goes to live in a upscale hotel. And so when they find him there, they essentially take all of his possessions, all of his money, and they tell him, you can live the rest of your life inside of this hotel, but if you ever try and leave, we will kill you. Like, that is the end of your life. So really, the story has to take place inside the confines of what essentially becomes a very small hotel, because in the case of a television series, you're not really getting any sort of outside perspective. There are a couple of times when you get to sort of see, you know, the snowy landscapes of Russia or the city itself. But for the most part, it's taking place like in his personal room, in the dining hall a lot. And that really kind of confines what you are capable of doing with the story. Now, my one biggest sort of gripe about the show, and I think the thing that irritates me the most about the show and sort of just immediately turns me off to it, is that the entire cast, as far as I know, with the exception of Mary Elizabeth Winstead, which I think we all know why she probably was considered for the role in this show, outside of her, everyone else is British. Everyone else. There is not, to my knowledge, a single actual Russian actor at all in A Gentleman in Moscow. And it isn't just that they've cast, you know, British actors and actresses that are putting on really terrible Russian accents. They don't even try. Like, everyone in the show is just British. And I would say, you know, I am not a huge sort of costume person. You know, I would consider myself kind of a layman to the differences in historical costumes during certain eras. You know, I really do like historical dramas. You guys know I love the BBC, but I don't think that I can tell in this show the difference between the things that like Ewan McGregor's character or anyone else's character wears in this that would differentiate it from just a British historical drama. I think the only time that it is sort of glaringly obvious is when you see like the Russian military characters, because obviously the military uniforms do stand out as significantly different. For some reason, just really, really bothers me that they didn't cast anyone from the country that they're in, specifically because the show and the story is taking place in such a small area that really, to me, there is nothing that sort of screams that they're in Moscow. And with everyone speaking with just regular British accents, it's very easy to kind of forget where you are, other than the names of the characters. But I guess in my mind, I don't quite understand why they didn't just take the story and sort of change it. Like, if they had no intention of making an attempt to be true to life, why not just sort of change some of the character names or change the setting to have it be a British setting. Or, I mean, I'm not entirely sure how they would do that because the story itself, obviously revolves very heavily around like the Russian Revolution and what's going on there. But it just boggles my mind that they didn't even put in like the barest minimal effort of attempting to make these characters sound Russian. I do, obviously recognize that this is probably more so a personal gripe and not something that, the regular viewer that is just looking for entertainment is really going to care that much about. But it stands out to me specifically because obviously the showrunners had enough of a thought about diversity and inclusion to have swapped some of the characters with Black actors and actresses, which during this time period probably would not have been very accurate. So to me, it's like, if you are going to go through that and make sure that you are being inclusive, why are you then not also being inclusive to the country with which the story is meant to take place? It just sort of frustrates me a little bit, frustrates me a lot a bit. And the story itself, now whether or not the book does this differently, I mean, I feel certain that it does. But to me, this story is just very two-dimensional. There isn't anything really going on that is that interesting to me other than the time period itself or the events that are going on kind of outside the hotel. But you don't really get that much going on inside the hotel. And I don't know if obviously this is a story that is going to progress and escalate in terms of things as it goes on. But so far in just the first 2 episodes, really, we haven't seen much of anything happen. And it's, as far as the time frame of those 2 episodes, it's like over a year. So in over a year of time, most of what he's done is like just tell stories to this little girl and find an extra space in the hotel that he sets up as like his own little private space. Like there really isn't much that is pulling me into wanting to continue learning about these characters. And sitting and watching it, it just seems like a very run-of-the-mill sort of British historical fiction, which is not at all the way that it should be perceived, because that's not at all where this is taking place. So for me, it's just kind of a loss in how they have approached this story and the execution of this story, more so than maybe what the story is about. I will say that now that I've kind of seen little bits of it, and like reading through some of the reviews of people just explaining the main character as he is written in the book, that I am a lot more interested now in reading the book, but I am not very interested in continuing to watch the show. So for me, A Gentleman in Moscow is kind of just a loss. You guys will have to let me know what you think of this one, if you have read the book or if you have watched the series. Subscribe if you want to join the Movie Nerd family, and I hope to see you in the next episode.